And you're going to convert this from a Hopecast to an actual forecast because you're going to have real metrics that you can chase, that you can put into a scorecard that'll determine how you're going to drive growth. Welcome to Driving Growth, the go-to-market podcast for traditional B2B businesses that are looking to build systems to create predictable revenue growth. In short, turning their company into a revenue factory. I'm your host, Steve Whittington, president of Roadmap and a believer in one simple truth. Sustainable growth is not an accident. It's engineered, and my company, Roadmap, is a builder of go-to-market systems. On today's show, forecasting sales versus hopecasting, how to build your revenue reality. Too often, I see forecasts, they're just what I call hopecasts. Essentially, someone has said, hey, we did this and we're going to get to that. They're a spreadsheet full of optimism and assumptions. They're built too late, they're reviewed too little, and they're not actually driving the business. So today, we're going to fix that. I'm going to walk you through how to build a real math-based annual forecast, starting with your existing accounts and building forward into new acquisition. This is the foundation for any serious go-to-market system. Let's talk timing. When do you actually go about building your sales forecast? Now, as a general rule of thumb, what I say is you should always, at minimum, build your forecast for the next fiscal 1 quarter ahead. So, at the beginning of quarter 4, you should be having a plan in place for the next fiscal. Now, that being said, there might be some other considerations, and that comes down to some of the critical metrics that you need to be able to forecast revenue. So what is your deal velocity, your close rate, and of course, average transaction size? Those are the three legs on the three-legged stool that your revenue sits upon. Now, if your deal velocity is 6 or 8 months, you may want to build back your forecasting, 6 or 8 months before the start of the next fiscal, because actions you're taking that far out are going to influence what your next fiscal is going to be. So you're going to have to take that nuance into consideration because, for example, being a traditional manufacturer or a service firm in which you have to acquire accounts to get the growth that you want to get, if you need to be onboarding accounts at the beginning of fiscal 1 in the next year, and it takes 6 months for that to happen, you need that activity 6 months prior to be able to hit your goals the next year. So that's why you have to have that nuance of how you actually plan when you do your forecast. You have heard me talk about this a lot. The heart of your forecast, how you figure out what you're going to get in revenue next year, comes down to knowing your existing customers, your account base, your book of business that is reoccurring revenue. Okay? Now, let me be distinct here. In the software as a service world, you have monthly reoccurring revenue. And in other types of industries such as insurance, you could have monthly reoccurring revenue. Anything that's subscription-based has monthly reoccurring revenue. But for the rest of us, we have accounts that we sell to on a reoccurring basis. So they may buy from us 2, 3 times a year, but they buy from us every year, 2, 3 times a year. So you have that book of business that is reoccurring revenue that then is the foundation, the block that you're going to base your annual projections upon. Going back to a previous episode on account management, we talked about tiering your accounts. You have your tier 1 accounts, your tier 2 accounts, your tier 3 accounts. So your strategic accounts, your growth accounts, and your transactional accounts. That's your existing book of business. You take your tier 1, you take your tier 2, and you look at that. That should be about 80% of your book of business. Now that is your baseline for what you're going to get for revenue. And you can look at that and you now have to calculate, well, let's pretend that's 50 accounts. Okay. Now, do you have any churn in those accounts? If you have a 10% churn, you're going to lose 5 accounts. Okay. So you have to be aware of that. What's your churn rate? And you can look at that over the past 3 years and you say, geez, these 50 accounts, they we lost 5 a year, or you know what, they all stayed with us. So we have zero churn. You want to know your churn rate. You want to be honest about it because you're trying to create a forecast, not a hopecast. Okay, so first look at your book of business. Organically, it's either expanding or contracting based on, just how you're showing up. And so again, taking those 50 accounts, you may have a natural expansion rate of say 10%, or you may have a natural contraction rate of 10%. So the formula, looking at this, we've got these 50 accounts. They're giving us $5 million in annual revenue. All right, great. We got $5 million. Now that has a churn rate of 10%. So we're going to be losing 10% of that. That's 500,000 is gone. So now you're at 4.5 million bucks. Now, if you have a natural expansion rate of 10%, you're you're not mathematically right back to where you were, but that is what you have to expand. The formula is book of business times churn rate times expansion rate. And if you look at your P&L, that will tell you what's been going on. You can do the math. And considering that, all things considered equal, you might have to actually think about what's happening with market headwinds, that sort of stuff. But that is a really good place to start as to how you're going to figure out the base of your annual forecast. Take your book of business, figure out, who your tier 1, your tier 2 accounts are, and then determine your churn rate, times it by your natural expansion rate. You now have a foundation for how much you're going to get the next fiscal. Now, a lot of folks do like strategic goal setting, and they might have prescribed to good to great with a 20-mile march. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to have 20% compounded growth per year. So we're going to go up and to the right and double our business in 5 years. And that's great stuff. Those are goals. So if that's the case, you've got that goal. So again, looking at this, if you've got that 20% annual growth rate that you have to get, this company has $5 million, 10% churn rate, 10% expansion rate. It's basically stuck at $5 million, but you have a goal where you want to grow by 20%. You got to grow by $1 million. So you got to get to $6 million. That's your goal. So now when you're creating your forecast, you have to back this out and determine what it is that you need to get that extra $1 million. And so that creates the activity metrics for your sales plan. That creates what you're going to put together to say, this is how we're going to get to that goal of $6 million. And you're going to convert this from a hopecast to an actual forecast, because you're going to have real metrics that you can chase, that you can put into a scorecard that'll determine how you're going to drive growth. All right. So that's the baseline formula, and then how you tie it to your goal to recognize that the gap that you have. We'll get back to the show in just a moment, but I wanted to take this chance to tell you about a new initiative at Roadmap. We have launched a go-to-market acceleration fund, and what we are doing is research with organizations to rank them with their go-to-market maturity. Now, here's the fun part, is that 5 organizations are going to be eligible for a $5,000 in funding to help them grow. For more information and to apply, go to weareroadmap.com/go-to-market acceleration fund. Now, let's get back to the show. You have $1 million gap in this example. How do you actually solve for that gap? Again, $5 million, we want to get $1 million more. And that gets back to that, that 3-legged stool. Average account size, what's the actual sales cycle, what's the close rate, and you can even start to think about order cadence when you're looking at bringing on new logos, new accounts. And it could be like, hey, somebody only orders from us twice a year. That's a typical thing. They order in spring and fall. So you need to know when you can bring on those accounts to be able to capture that order cadence. Okay. So if you got to bring $1 million in business and your average account size is $100,000, ordering twice a year, spring and fall, you could say, well, geez, I got to bring in 10 accounts. Well, that may be, but if you have that ordering cadence of spring and fall, it might be, I got to bring in 10 accounts before the spring order in order to get my extra $1 million, because they got to order twice. They order spring and they got to order fall. If you only bring in 5 before the spring order and you bring in 5 for the fall order, what are you going to do? You're going to miss by about 25%. right? You got to know that ordering cadence. So you've got those three metrics. You got basically your average account size, you got your sales cycle, and you got your close rates. And that's why it's so important to understand the sales cycle for when you actually do the forecast. Because if you've got a 6-month deal velocity, it takes 6 months to close somebody, you've got to get those 10 dealers in place before that initial spring order, 6 months out. So you got to be closing these people and landing them after the fall order cycle, if that's what it is in your sales cadence. So that's one thing to consider, is how do you actually now hit your growth? And then you're going to have to break out a whole bunch of different activity metrics that will do that. And it could be that, listen, you've got $100,000 per account, and to get that one logo, you need to have a number of discovery sessions or opportunities, ups, deals. And if you have a close rate of 50%, so to get 10, you're going to need 20 opportunities. And so how do you get 20 opportunities? Well, each opportunity, it usually takes 10 kind of phone calls to get somebody into the pipeline. So you got to make 100 calls. So you're looking at this, and it's like you have to have a target account list of 100 people in the fall to be able to close them within 6 months, to hit that spring order time, to get that order cadence of twice a year, to get that extra $1 million, to hit your 20% compounded growth that you have in your hope forecast. And now you really, really have a forecast because you broke it down. I've got a book of business that's going to give me $5 million. I know I got to bring on 10 accounts. That's going to give me another $1 million. I know what my close rate is. I know what my deal velocity is. I know how much activities my sales team has to do that. I can then mathematically model this out and then figure the various different things that my team needs to do as far as marketing motions and sales motions, be it trade shows or some sort of search campaign or demand generation campaign, outbound calling campaign, webinars to gather leads, all that sort of stuff can tie into getting me those 100 folks that then I can convert into my pipeline. And very, very quickly, this goal, which was a hope, is now based in mathematical reality. And there's a ton of other levers now that you can pull. You can take that existing book of business and you can say, geez, it's $5 million. I've got a natural expansion rate of 10%. And what else can I do? Well, if I insert a new product into that existing book of business, that might give me an extra $500,000 in business. So then my expansion rate all of a sudden goes from 10 to 20%. Okay, good, right? That's a motion. That's something I can do. I can grow with my existing customers instead of having to acquire so many. So you've got now that you've got a mathematical model based and your forecast is based out, you've got different levers you can pull, and you've started with that whole annual picture of what you have to do. Okay, what's next? What's next is you have to deepen the forecast. If you're a manufacturer or if you're a service-based firm, you have to cross-reference what you're going to sell, number of units by month, or service lines by month, or it could be by quarter if that's a more effective cycle. And you have to tie that to your accounts. Every tier 1 and tier 2 account should have a revenue projection, should have a product level or unit level or service consumption forecast. This is what they're going to do this year based on the conversations we've had with them and what's projected with what they've done last year, that sort of stuff. And then you tie that into a plan for how you're going to retain them, how you're going to keep them, how you're going to expand, maybe by inserting more products or actually growing with them, or recovery if they've been declining. How can you get them back to the table? How can you recover that account? How can you reactivate that account? Okay, so you're forecasting. You forecast that at a big level. Now you're doing it by account. So we've taken that book of business and you're doing account by account with an individual plan. Now, you need to look at all this stuff. What they're, maybe there's other order trends by each account, so that you say, listen, even though we have this, most of our orders are in spring and most of them are in fall, these tier 1 accounts, they order 4 times a year. And so you have to have that forecast out. And then when you do all this kind of stuff and you look at the account volume, the order volume, all that stuff, and those trends with your P&L, you can then have a forecast by quarter. And it could be that, 40% of your revenue comes in quarter 1 and 40% comes in quarter 4, but then the other 20% comes in Q2 and Q3. And you got to know what that is and know where to expect it and have it trended to your accounts, your tier 1s and your tier 2s, which are 80% of your business, so you can keep your business on track. With these inputs in place, you can then, with confidence, build out a monthly and quarterly sales projections that then drive the activity metrics of your account managers and your teams, which provides all the targets, all the requirements that have to happen quarter by quarter to hit your goals. There are external factors. Of course, right now in our world, there is a bunch of different headwinds from various things that are happening geopolitically. That's a reality. That's business. There's always going to be that. You have to, of course, factor that in. When I was looking at projections for Roadmap, I put in factors for that and adjusted my forecast that I had done 4 months prior. And I said, okay, this is a reality. And now I have these levers to adjust it because of that reality, right? You can be launching a new product or a new service line, which is going to give you found revenue that might make up that shortfall. And so you have to factor that in. There might be a new competitor that's coming in that's consuming market share and you haven't been able to adjust or combat against it. So all these kind of things are going to help you adjust whether you are actually going to expand your accounts or there's going to be a contraction. And you gotta know the answers. And if you don't know these answers, do what I recommend over and over and over again. Go talk to your customers and survey your top 20 accounts and find out how they're feeling about what's happening, what they're going to expect for the next year. With all these inputs, you now turn this forecast into a system. You have your account management goals. You have your acquisition targets. You have your campaign timing based upon order cycles. You have resource allocation, and you have your weekly scorecard that's driving and giving you trends and seeing if you're on track, off track. And you will know what your base of tier accounts are going to produce. You know where the gaps are happening if you're tracking it all the time. So you might have to do more acquisition because your current accounts aren't doing what was expected. And you know what you do to close those gaps because you have it all into a system. And most importantly, when you think about this, when you've done this work, you have built a system, not a guess. You have replaced hope that you're going to grow by a certain percentage with math, optimism with operations. The difference between a real forecast and a hopecast is the difference between leading and just reacting and accepting I get what I get and I don't get upset. When you build a full math-driven forecast, you give your business a blueprint. You know what accounts matter most. You know how many new clients you need. You know where your gaps are and how to close them. Your team has focus. Your resources have purpose. And your revenue has predictability because you're controlling your destiny. And if you don't, you just got ballpark numbers that are based on good vibes and past wins. You're building your year on hope. And hope is not a strategy. It's a trap. A real forecast lets you drive growth. A hopecast leaves you chasing it. The choice isn't between optimism and realism. It's between intention and luck. So ask yourself, are you betting on your future or building it? If you've liked what you heard, go to weareroadmap.com/podcast and download the Revenue Factory Toolkit, in which you will receive mathematical models and a framework for building your go-to-market system. Also, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, with new episodes dropping the first and third Wednesday of every month. I'm Steve Whittington. Thanks for listening. Keep building your Revenue Factory one brick at a time.